So I've known about SpongeBob ever since I was a little boy, and holy crap, I friggin' love this show. Similar to Super Mario Logan, there are lots of episodes that I like, even in the post-movie era, like Krusty Towers, The Lost Mattress, Roller Coward, Band Geeks, Pizza Delivery, Chocolate with Nuts, etc. But I'll save all those for a best list soon. But for now, we're focusing on the worst episodes of the show. Now before I get into it, I'm going to set off a few rules. First off, I'm only including regular episodes, so no specials/TV movies like Atlantis Squarepants, Best Day Ever, or Truth or Square. Secondly, I'm not including any episodes from seasons 1 or 9B. Why? Because I haven't seen any episodes of 9B and I don't think it's fair to judge the first season of SpongeBob, since they were only getting started, so that automatically disqualifies I Was a Teenage Gary. Finally, please be mature about your opinions in the comments. It's fine if you don't agree with me, but don't be so obnoxious about it, alright? Now, with all that said, let's get into my least favourite SpongeBob episodes. For number 11, we have Gone. Now this episode has become very notorious for its ending, but we'll get to that soon. In this episode, SpongeBob wakes up to find that some of his friends are missing. He soon realizes that he's the only one in Bikini Bottom, and that everyone is gone.
He said it!
SpongeBob decides to live out his friends' lives for them, and this is when the episode starts to get kind of creepy. SpongeBob begins to impersonate all of his friends, including Squidward, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Mrs. Puff. Then SpongeBob starts dating a boat in an actually clever reference to the Stephen King novel Christine. After the boat randomly turns on him, we get to the most well-known part of the episode. Just watch this footage for me.
Huh?
Sheesh, calm down, boy.
You're all still alive? Well, where did you go?
It was National No SpongeBob Day.
National No SpongeBob Day?
Yeah, a whole day dedicated to getting away from you.
You too, Patrick?
Everybody needs at least one day away from...
First we build a giant wooden effigy of you, then we burn it to the ground and dance on the ashes like there was no tomorrow.
National No SpongeBob Day. You know, not even Squidward would have done this in the pre-movie era, and he hated SpongeBob back then. Also, aren't SpongeBob and Patrick supposed to be friends? Because if Patrick was a real best friend, he wouldn't have abandoned his best friend for weeks. So why is this episode number 11 and not higher on the list? Well, similar to Bowser Jr.'s credit card, it's only one thing about this episode that really bothered me, which was the ending. This ending is one of the most cruel endings I've ever seen, and is the main reason why this lands on a fair amount of people's worst lists. Other than that though, I actually quite like this episode. The whole SpongeBob Goes Crazy plot was done so much better in this episode than it was done in something like To Love a Patty. Since, let's be honest, wouldn't you go crazy if you thought you were the only person left on Earth? So yeah, SpongeBob is more believable here than he was in To Love a Patty. And also, at least this episode isn't as bad as some of the other episodes on this list. Speaking of which... At the number 10 spot, we've got Shuffleboarding. This is another infamous episode, but unlike Gone, the reason that makes this episode so infamous isn't the only reason people hate it. So, let's talk about it. It starts off with SpongeBob and Patrick paying a typical visit to Merman Run and Barnacle Boy, some of the few characters in this show that hasn't suffered from much flanderization. Then after a series of unfortunate events, they end up in the hospital and can't go to a shuffleboarding tournament. SpongeBob and Patrick volunteer to fill in for them using disguises, and Barnacle Boy tells them to bring the costumes back to them when they're finished.
Here, take these rings. And when you touch them together, you'll be instantly transformed into our duplicates.
We're ready! Man Bob!
And Pet Boy!
You know what? So far, this episode is turning out okay. I honestly don't see why this episode is as hated as it
And
is.
the best part is, there is no way we can lose with these costumes on!
We already won the tournament.
Oh, so that's why. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, don't worry. So now that they already won the tournament, they end up going around arresting innocent people who did absolutely nothing wrong.
You're chewing too loud!
Your shoe's untied!
You're too old!
They even get into a cool fight with Man Ray, and it was actually kind of funny to see him with a small head. Though it would have been more effective if he'd have actually been committing a crime. In the end, SpongeBob and Patrick get away with what they did, while Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy get all the blame.
Looking good, Man Ray. Faster, you old coot.
They have so many fans!
Now back to the reason that makes this episode so infamous. The fact that they scrapped the shuffleboarding plot in exchange for another plot. How do I feel about this? I actually thought it was kind of clever. See, I hate shuffleboarding. To me, it's just boring and I can't find any entertainment value in it whatsoever. So honestly, I would have hated this episode more if they had actually gone with the shuffleboarding plot. So why do I still not like this episode? Easily for the second half. I just didn't really like SpongeBob and Patrick causing so much trouble and getting away with it. By the way, all that stuff makes them really unlikable here. But if you thought that Patrick is a jerk in this episode, you sure as hell won't like him in our next episode. Coming in at number 9, we got Yours and Mine and Mine. But wait, why is this only at number 9 and not higher on the list? I mean, it features Patrick being a gigantic asshole and actually winning in the end. I'll get to why I don't hate this episode as much as everyone else does. It starts off with the Krusty Krab. Hey, remember Mr. Enter's rule of thumb, where any episode from season 5 or 6 that starts with the Krusty Krab is gonna be a complete disaster? Seems like a long time ago. Anyway, Patrick wants a Happy Kiddie meal, which is an obvious reference to the McDonald's Happy Meals. But he can't afford it. So SpongeBob suggests sharing it, but Patrick takes money out of SpongeBob's wallet and calls it sharing.
Sure. You see, sharing is the most wonderful...
Yeah. I'm familiar with the concept of sharing.
He then eats the kiddie meal and gets mad because there's no toy.
What? That's a ripoff! I want my money back!
And that was SpongeBob's money, you jerk. So Mr. Krabs hears about this and gives SpongeBob a toy made out of a Krabby Patty, which he calls a Patty Pal.
Yes!
An official Krusty Krab licensed toy? My purpose in life is to have you as my toy.
However, Patrick takes the Patty Pal from SpongeBob and calls it sharing.
Am I interrupting?
Oh, hey, Patrick. Have you met my new toy?
Don't you mean our new toy?
Our new toy?
It came from the meal that we're sharing.
Sharing?
Remember, sharing is the most wonderful feeling in the world.
Patty Pal. Now, can I see it again, Patrick?
What? I thought we were sharing it.
Well, it's my turn.
Aren't you supposed to be working?
Patrick, you do know when you share something, you have to let the other person use it as well, right?
How about now?
Nah, maybe tomorrow.
Huge emphasis on the maybe. Now, unlike in some other episodes, Patrick isn't doing this because he's an idiot. He's doing it because he's a selfish asshole with no likability whatsoever. SpongeBob arrives the next morning to get the Patty Pal for Patrick, but he refuses.
Hand it over, Patrick. I get to play with the Patty Pal today.
You can't take it! It's not fair!
How about I only take it for half a day? How about we trade off every hour? Every half hour? Every 15 minutes? 5 minutes? 1 minute?
No!
Okay, my final offer, we trade off every second.
1!
1!
What?
Fast forward to the ending, after a few gags. Patrick eats the patty and it's revealed that Krabs made more of them and gives them to SpongeBob and Patrick. And that's when the worst part of the entire episode occurs.
Each.
This time it's on me!
Patrick, that's my money.
Have you learned nothing about sharing?
The fact that Patrick learned absolutely nothing and got away with doing what he did just really ticked me off. So why is it that I don't hate this episode as much as everyone else? Well, to be honest, some of the jokes actually worked. Here's a few examples.
Yes! Today is my Patty Pal Day! Oh, this is gonna be fun! Gary, of course Patrick will give me my turn with the Patty Pal. Gary, you can be a real negative Nancy. I heard that. Hi, Patrick! Time to share!
Deceiver! You didn't leave at all!
Oh, and you were washing your hair?
I was too, see?
Hey! Oh, Gary was so right about you. You're a non-sharer!
Gary said that? You're off my friend list, Gary!
Another example I liked is SpongeBob's reaction to the Patty Pal.
This old Krusty Krab licensed toy?
Which was followed by Mr. Krabs' reaction to SpongeBob's reaction.
Disgusting.
So yeah, some of the jokes were actually kind of funny. If Patrick wasn't a huge jerk, this could have actually been a good episode. But instead, we got an episode that shows one of Patrick's worst appearances. Up next, we have Plankton's Regular. In this episode, Plankton manages to actually get a regular customer named Nat, who is a recurring character in the series. Nat seems to really enjoy Plankton's food, so Plankton goes over to tell Mr. Krabs about this, and he is absolutely horrified about this tragic piece of news.
Loyal to me, Plankton, not to you.
Hey, Plankton, can I get another one of your delicious chumsticks?
But of course, loyal customer. I'll see you later, loser. Much later!
Oh no, how can this be? Boy, front and center!
Yes, sir!
Plankton's trying to overthrow me business. He's got a customer that actually likes his food. You gotta get that guy back on our side with a couple of Krabby Patties.
But in all honesty, Krabs, can't you just let him have at least one freaking customer? No, wait, no. Okay. Do what you must then. I'm not gonna stop you. So after a few failed attempts of convincing Nat to eat a patty, Krabs tries to steal Plankton's formula in an actually clever form of irony. However, it's later revealed that Nat was paid by Karen to eat Plankton's chum. So Plankton gets really upset about it while Mr. Krabs watches in glee.
Back for more of my delicious chum, I see.
Not this time.
Huh?
Not ever again. The deal's off, computer. I can't eat another bite of that slop, no matter how much you pay me.
Huh?
I have eaten 10 of those things, and I've already had to go to the doctor. Twice!
Oh. Oh.
Oh. If you need me, I'll be getting my stomach pumped. Again!
What's the deal, Karen?
The deal was that I paid Nat to eat your chum so you'd quit your constant complaining.
All this time, I never had one regular customer?
Duh.
Should have known! Why would anyone ever eat my slop?
Yeah, there he goes again. Cut it out, Plankton.
What? It's just obvious that I'm a complete failure and a waste of a lower life form. Oh, woe is me!
Wow, what a sadistic episode. Now you might think that this is the only episode at number 8. If you thought that, then you are absolutely incorrect, because this entry is a tie between this episode and Nautical Novice. In this episode, SpongeBob goes on a trip with his boating school. It's okay up until the last third, where it seems like SpongeBob saves the day, but it's revealed that SpongeBob wasn't actually controlling the boat. It was just some guy towing it.
SpongeBob, I don't know how, but you did it. You saved us all. Let's get off this thing. And the way you pulled the anchor out, genius. I never thought I'd say this, but here's your driver's license.
Oh, boy! At long last!
What are you two doing here?
Huh?
No one should be on board while I'm tugging the museum into port.
You mean he wasn't driving this thing at all?
Heck no!
Now I want you to take a look at this screenshot from the episode. Do you see the guy in front of the boat? Of course he didn't. It's almost like the episode was going to end with SpongeBob getting his license, but was scrapped quickly. So, why are these two videos tied at number 8? Well, they both have one common feature. They both have cop-out endings that just ruin the episodes for me. There is one thing, however, that I do like from Plankton's regular. You see, after Nat tried the Krusty Krab's chum, he says,
You like it?
It's...
Yeah?
It's...
Well, what do you think?
It's the second foulest thing I've ever tasted.
I just thought it was a good bit of foreshadowing that the episode did well. Yeah, I don't have much else to say here, so I'm just gonna move on to... Up next, we have one of the most unsettling and unpleasant episodes I've ever seen in this show. Demolition Doofus. In this episode, SpongeBob severely cripples Mrs. Puff, and she'll never be able to puff again. So then, after knowingly crippling her, SpongeBob makes a very mean joke about it.
From now on, I guess we'll have to call you Mrs. Pop.
Relax.
Sheesh, I don't know what she's so upset about. I think she looks better this way, as I always tell you to do.
Yes, everyone needs to relax.
That's something I'd expect to hear from modern Patrick or Peter Griffin. Not you, SpongeBob. You're usually better than this. SpongeBob continues to take care of Mrs. Puff very irresponsibly, which makes him very dislikable here.
Pretty gruesome, huh? You gotta hand it to those guys, risking their lives for our amusement.
Risking their lives for our amusement?
Wait, Where are you going with this?
I could finally be rid of SpongeBob. Forever! And I mean that in the worst possible way.
Jesus Christ, who put this in a kids show? Yes, Mrs. Puff enters SpongeBob into the derby and he nearly gets killed. Now, I want to root for SpongeBob. I really do. But I can't because of how little he cared about Mrs. Puff. And I can't root for Mrs. Puff either because she's trying to kill someone. I have this theory that this episode was originally going to air on Comedy Central or Adult Swim due to its dark themes, but it was accidentally aired on Nickelodeon and the censors didn't really care enough to take it off there. That's the only explanation I can give as to why this thing showed up on Nickelodeon. So, how would I fix this episode? Simple. Have SpongeBob actually be concerned for Mrs. Puff's well-being, have Mrs. Puff enter him into the derby to get money for a recovery, and, most importantly, don't have her try to kill SpongeBob! Just a quick warning, if you are squeamish or grossed out, there's some really unpleasant imagery in this entry, so if you can't handle that, just skip on to number 5. At this point you probably know what episode I'm talking about. The Splinter. Jesus Christ, this episode is absolutely disgusting. It starts out alright like most episodes on this list do, but quickly turns rotten the moment SpongeBob gets that goddamn splinter. After a few failed attempts of removing it, he puts a spatula on his nose so he can cook with it. Squidward notices and lies to SpongeBob saying that he will have to remove it, otherwise Mr. Krabs will send him home. After a few frustrating seconds of SpongeBob crying and Squidward being a heartless monster, we get to the scene where Patrick acts like a doctor. Now I'm going to compare this to another episode where Patrick plays Dr. Suds. In both of these episodes, Patrick plays doctor to try and help SpongeBob. And that is where the similarities sadly end. Now you see, in Suds, Patrick seems like he really wanted to help SpongeBob when he was sick, and when SpongeBob pointed out something was wrong, Patrick tried something else. He will never talk back to SpongeBob. Here though, he acts very obnoxious and smug, like in this lovely scene.
Interesting.
Patrick? Patrick, this isn't helping!
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were a doctor.
I'm not!
Oh, but I'm sure you can figure it out with your 12 years of med school.
Patrick, you didn't go to med school.
So?
Patrick, I'm sorry. I really need your help.
Oh, no. It looks like you have things under control.
Please, Patrick!
So after that, Mr. Krabs finds out about the splinter and pulls it out of SpongeBob's body. Then Squidward harms himself. Why?
Whew. For a second there, I thought I was gonna have to pay a workman's compensation.
What's workers' compensation?
You know, when you get paid for sitting at home.
You mean I can get paid while I'm at home?
Yeah, what do you think conversation stands for? Squidward?
I get my compensation now.
Oh, sorry, Squidward, your shift ended over 2 minutes ago.
In short, this episode is gross, unpleasant, notorious, and is only number 6. You know, I never thought I could hate Squidward due to all the misery that he goes through and all of the abuse he has to suffer. Hell, I didn't even hate him that much in episodes like Sponge-Cano. But Little Yellow Book proved that they could make even Squidward unlikable. That is something that I never thought could happen until I saw this episode. In this episode, Squidward gets his tentacles on SpongeBob's diary and begins reading it out loud to the customers in the Krusty Krab, with no motivation whatsoever.
You laughing at me?
What? Oh, no. I was just reading what SpongeBob wrote in his diary. It's hilarious.
Reading somebody else's diary. That's terrible.
Please remember this scene for me. So after reading out a few more of SpongeBob's embarrassing secrets, SpongeBob eventually finds out that Squidward had read his diary and runs away crying. Then everyone turns against Squidward and calls him the bad guy for doing this.
That was that little dude's diary?
That's no Squidward. Even for you.
Wait a minute, weren't they reading the diary as well? Hypocrisy much? Well anyway, Squidward is thrilled that he did this as SpongeBob. Now I'd like to direct a little attention to Fools in April. Both that and Little Yellow Book have Squidward upset SpongeBob. But Fools in April did it much better, as Squidward actually felt remorseful for his actions. Oh yeah, also he wasn't being told off by hypocritical people. But here Squidward shows absolutely no remorse. I mean sure, SpongeBob's done terrible stuff to Squidward, as we'll later see, but Squidward doesn't cite these as reasons for what he's done, so it doesn't work.
Diary reader!
What? You read it too?
Oh, sure. Blame everyone but yourself. That is so you.
Shut the hell up!
Anyway, he finally decides to apologize to SpongeBob. Oh wait a minute, no, he doesn't apologize, he just asks SpongeBob to forgive him. Look.
Hi, Squidward. How's it going?
SpongeBob, oh thank goodness. You have to forgive me.
What for?
So it's revealed that SpongeBob actually published the diary that Squidward read, and also reveals that Squidward's never even seen his personal diary. So Squidward reads SpongeBob's personal diary, and the most insulting thing about the episode occurs.
Let's get him!
Peebo! Stop your assault! Through my art as an author, I have forgiven Squidward. Squidward! How could you?
I don't care. This is so worth it.
Really, Squidward? Your torment is worth it? Are you flippin' kidding me? Now there are some redeemable qualities about this episode. Like, some of the jokes were okay, and at least it told a story. Unlike in SpongeBob You're Fired, which would definitely have been on this list if it wasn't a special. And Squidward will always remain my most sympathetic character on the show, but this episode definitely did drop him down a few places in my favourite SpongeBob characters list. Overall, with the confusing writing of the Bikini Bottom Citizens and Squidward's lack of likability in this episode, Little Yellow Book easily makes my bottom 5 episodes.
It's so worth it.
Boating Buddies. Oh, I honestly feel ashamed that I own this episode on DVD. This is the absolute worst Squidward Torture episode that I've ever seen. Not one of the worst, the worst. So let's dive right in, shall we? It starts with SpongeBob being a sick creep.
Oh, Squidward, it's you! I thought I heard something.
SpongeBob, I've been sitting here motionless for 45 minutes. What could you possibly have heard me doing?
Breathing.
Squidward tries to get away from SpongeBob, and apparently that's the worst thing anyone can ever do ever. So the episode feels the need to punish him for it. So here's an idea. Let's have Squidward get a ticket and have to go to boating school with the little cubic creeper. And let's turn SpongeBob into a bigger stalker than the ones you usually hear in Lazy Masquerade's scary Yandere stories.
Yes. Would you like to tell the rest of the class why you're with us today?
Why, I'm...
You know, as Pie Guy Rule said, this portrayal of SpongeBob in this certain episode is really character damaging. After a few incidents where SpongeBob proves to be worse at driving than someone who's driving blindfolded, and a shrink ray incident which is the only redeemable quality about this episode, Squidward gets beaten up by someone who he had mistaken for SpongeBob in a previous scene. And since he's injured, he is unable to complete the test and has to redo it next week. All this happened to Squidward for no reason. Look, writers, I'm not asking for much here. I'm only asking for a Squidward Torture episode that's justified. Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm asking for a justified Squidward Torture episode that's actually good. A pal for Gary. Yep, y'all knew this one was gonna be on the list. Now you might be surprised to see that this one is only number 3 and not number 1, which I'll get into why that is in a little bit. Basically, SpongeBob thinks that Gary is lonely, which he isn't, so he buys him a pet.
Thanks, bye!
Why bother? They never listen.
Okay, so he doesn't buy the thing, he steals it. Now, everything up until this point has been alright, but now we're getting into the worst aspects of this. Whenever SpongeBob leaves the room, there's a running gag where the thing known as Puffy Fluffy tries to eat Gary alive. Believe it or not though, at one point Gary actually tries to be nice to Puffy, but he still tries to eat him. And SpongeBob, I don't even know what else can be said about this guy. He's certainly more ignorant in this episode, even more than usual. Even more than the episodes where he's dicking around with Patrick. Even in those episodes, he's not too ignorant. He is a little bit ignorant, but not too much. So anyway, later that night, SpongeBob goes to sleep, and Puffy Fluffy turns into... Look. This thing, this beast, this horrible monstrosity tries to eat Gary all night. Then SpongeBob wakes up and realizes that all of his personal belongings are destroyed. Then he finds Gary and... Oh, okay, stop. I want you to watch this and some clips from some of the older episodes back to back.
Gary! You put Buffy down right now! Bad boy, Gary! Bad boy, bad! Buffy, wait! Well, Gary, what do you have to say for yourself? Gary! Oh, Gary!
Yeah, it's really hard to watch, isn't it? Gary ends up rescuing SpongeBob, and SpongeBob still thinks that Gary did all the things that Puffy Fluffy had done, and he makes Gary come out to work with him, despite the fact that Gary enjoyed staying alone while SpongeBob was at work.
Serve him up, snail!
Overall, it's not hard to see why this episode has a 3.3 out of 10 rating on IMDb. Also, in the Polish dub of this episode, SpongeBob tells Puffy Fluffy to put Gary down. Can I just say that that should have been in the English dub as well? At least in the case of A Pal for Gary, Gary wasn't physically hurt. However, in our next episode, Gary is in constant pain. So for number 2, we got Pet Sitter Pat, aka A Pal for Gary 2. This episode seems like the writers were trying to fix A Pal for Gary, but they completely missed on what made A Pal for Gary such a terrible episode. Granted, this episode does do some things a bit better than A Pal for Gary, as SpongeBob's paranoia is much more believable here than it was in the other episode. Basically, he's invited to go to his grandmother's party and has to find someone to watch Gary while he's gone. He goes over to Squidward's house. SpongeBob, after the event of I Was a Teenage Gary, you might want to reconsider that choice. The good news is that Squidward declines. Thank God, now we won't get an I Was a Teenage Gary 2. The bad news is that he brings Gary to Patrick. Now remember when I said back when I was talking about Yours, Mine and Mine, that episode was one of Patrick's worst appearances? Yeah, this episode takes the title as Patrick's worst appearance. When they get to SpongeBob's house, he throws out the instruction that SpongeBob leaves for him, due to thinking that he has bad handwriting, starves Gary, and even tries to kill him. Jesus Christ, I'm starting to question these mature themes in this kid-friendly show. After a while, SpongeBob's house begins to flood, due to the fact that the wasted space left the bathtub running. SpongeBob ends the party to get home. By the way, can I just say, the only things I like about this episode is scenes with SpongeBob and his grandma, and one joke Patrick tells at the beginning. This episode ends really confusingly, just watch.
Ah, reading Patrick a bedtime story, I see. Snail Tales, that's a good one.
Snail Tales? I thought it was called Meow Meow Meow.
So in short, this episode was just mean-spirited towards Gary, and is actually even more cruel than A Pal for Gary. Patrick gets away with what he did as usual, and the ending just comes out of nowhere. Yeah, it's not hard to see why this is Mr. Enter's least favourite episode of the entire series. The only question is what could possibly be worse. Now before I get to number 1, similar to my SNL video, I want to give a few honourable mentions / runner-ups. Keep Bikini Bottom beautiful. Sure, some of the jokes are weak and that cop gets kind of annoying, but hey, Squidward wins in the end. And this is one of the only torture episodes where he isn't physically harmed. So that's enough to keep it off my least favourite episodes. Can I just say that this episode definitely doesn't deserve to share the 3.3 out of 10 rating on IMDb with A Pal for Gary. Sure, I know that episode has a 3.3 because they're sister episodes, but still. Squid Baby. I know some of you wanted to see this one on the list, but the best thing is that I've never seen this episode, so I don't have to go through the trouble of watching Squidward as a baby. Rise and Shine. Honestly, this is one of the episodes that I like that everyone else hates. It's only 4 minutes long, so it doesn't really waste much of your time, and the alarm clock didn't really bother me much. Plus, some of the jokes were actually really funny. The only gripe I have with this episode is that it does feel kind of pointless. Face Freeze. Similar to Rise and Shine, this one is underrated. The faces didn't freak me out much. The faces didn't really freak me out much, and it feels like a story you tell your children to behave. Though, to be fair, I don't like this episode as much as Rise and Shine. Spongehenge. This was the episode that was so bad it caused Pie Guy Rules to give up on SpongeBob for a while. But I haven't seen this episode in ages, so I can't critique it properly. I might do a solo review on it soon. Now, with all that being said, let's get to the worst SpongeBob episode of all time. So, what will be the worst SpongeBob episode of all time? What is it? What could possibly be the worst episode of the entire set? Okay, why am I dragging this out too long? You all know what episode it's gonna be. One Course Meal. Should be titled One Course Episode. Yeah, because coarse means rough, and this was a really rough episode to get through. Now look, I did not want this episode to be number 1, not because I didn't hate it, oh trust me I do, but because a lot of top lists I've seen has ranked this episode as number 1 as well. Choosing this episode as the worst is like choosing Band Geeks as the best. It's getting kind of cliche at this point. But I'm sorry, I just couldn't find any other episode that I hated more than this. This is the most mean-spirited thing I've ever seen done to someone who isn't Squidward. Basically, after a cool opening scene, Mr. Krabs realizes that Plankton is afraid of whales. You know, despite the fact that he's interacted with Pearl in the past, but hey, maybe they forgot, so I'll give the writers the benefit of the doubt for that one. So, Mr. Krabs dresses up as Pearl and scares the hell out of Plankton. After 2 weeks of this happening, this is what Plankton looks like.
Plankton, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you bring it up? I can't risk stepping into the light. The whale might see me.
That very night, he has a horrific nightmare and cannot take it anymore. Then we get to the most infamous part of the episode.
Hi, Plankton. What you doing laying in the middle of the road?
Go away, cheesehead. Can't you see I'm trying to get run over? In fact, better yet, just step on me as hard as you can. Would you do that, bro?
Now I'm gonna say this right now. I don't think the writers meant for it to be as taken as harshly as it did. I do not think it was meant to look as bad as it does. However, I can't deny the fact that they put suicide in a kids show. Not only that, they put a realistic message of suicide in a kids show. Yeah, getting hit by a bus is a very common message of suicide. I also want to say that when SpongeBob tells Mr. Krabs about Plankton being depressed, he doesn't actually mention the suicide to Krabs. He only says,
I just thought it would be pertinent for you to know that Plankton's laying in the street, forlorn.
Also, there are a few ways that the writers could have pulled this plot correctly. Like maybe Mr. Krabs hired Pearl for security, and Plankton had to try and sneak in some funny antics. That would have worked. Or maybe Mr. Krabs could have dressed up as Pearl whenever Plankton came across the restaurant. I mean, that would have worked. It would have given him actual motivation to do what he did. So, is this episode overhated? Yeah, a little bit, but that doesn't excuse for how mean-spirited and cruel it is. I mean, at least in A Pal for Gary, you can argue that SpongeBob's obliviousness wasn't on purpose, even if it was annoying as hell. Here, Krabs was knowingly trying to traumatize Plankton. This episode was so bad that it actually made me start to like Plankton, something that the previous seasons had never made me do. Then again, he's one of the few characters on this show that hasn't suffered from character flanderization. Fun fact, Doug Lawrence, the voice of Plankton and one of the writers of this episode, came up with the idea of this episode. One Course Meal is such a cruel and such a terrible episode that it deserves that 3.8 out of 10 on IMDb and deserves to be called the worst SpongeBob episode of all time. Honestly, after ranting about these episodes, I still really love SpongeBob. He's my absolute favourite Nicktoon. When we think of SpongeBob, we don't think about these episodes. We think about the pre-movie and even the good post-movie episodes out there. And I hear that the show has been getting better. Steven Hillenburg came back and is now making some major improvements to the show. So it's good to see that he's improving the show like it once was. Did I miss out on any bad episodes? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. Have a nice day, everybody.